But let's start with a question for you. Are your flaws really flaws? Or could they be something else entirely? Just hang on to that thought, because it's right at the heart of Adler's whole view of what it means to be human.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by seeing why Adler was such a rebel. Then we'll get into his big ideas. After that, we'll cover his famous and pretty dramatic break from Freud. We'll unpack what his individual psychology is really all about. And finally, we'll look at why his work still matters so much today.
Okay, first up, Adler the rebel. See, he wasn't your typical physician. He was a deep thinker who just refused to be boxed in by the purely medical explanations of his day.
Adler started his career as a doctor right in the heart of early 20th century Vienna. But pretty quickly he realized that trying to explain all of our human struggles with biology alone just wasn't enough. He felt like a huge piece of the puzzle was missing.
So, he started looking in some pretty unconventional places for answers. He was reading philosophers like Nietzsche, literary giants like Shakespeare, and even religious texts. And on top of all that, he was a passionate advocate for social justice and women's rights. It was this incredible mix of the humanities and activism that became the real foundation for his psychology. So how did all these different influences come together to form his core theories? Let's get into it and break down Adler's big ideas, the concepts that really defined him. His first and most foundational idea, which he actually borrowed from Aristotle, is simple but so profound. We are, at our core, social creatures. You can't understand a person in a vacuum. Our relationships and our community, well, they're everything. And this leads us to his brilliant concept of compensation. Now, this isn't just about overcoming a weakness. What Adler was saying is that our struggles often come from a clash, a mismatch between our own personal strengths and what our social situation is demanding from us. Imagine being a super creative, out-of-the-box thinker, stuck in a job that's all about rules and spreadsheets. That's the kind of mismatch he was talking about. This quote really drives the point home. Adler got this insight from reading Shakespeare, noticing that tragedy doesn't usually happen because of one single flaw in a character. No, it's the interaction between who that person is and the situation they're in that causes the real problems. It's all about the context. Okay, Adler's next big idea is a fascinating one. It's called useful fictions. And the main point here is that what we believe to be true can often be way more powerful than what is actually objectively true. So, a useful fiction is basically a personal story, a belief system that we use to make sense of the world and to chase our goals. The key thing is it doesn't have to be 100% factually accurate to have a huge impact on how we live our lives. Let's make this real. Think about the saying, hard work always pays off. Now, is that objectively true for every single person in every situation? Of course not. But believing it, that can give you the motivation to push through some seriously tough times. It might be a fiction, but it's an incredibly useful one. Now, as you can probably imagine, ideas this different were bound to cause some friction with the biggest name in psychology at the time, Sigmund Freud. Their famous split wasn't just some petty argument. It was a deep, fundamental clash of two totally different ways of seeing the world. And they started out as close colleagues. Adler was part of Freud's inner circle way back in 1902. And he even became its president. But by 1911, their ideas were just too far apart. Adler's theories were officially kicked out of the club, declared incompatible with Freud's psychoanalysis, and so he resigned. So what was the big fight about? Well, it really boiled down to these two major disagreements you see here. First, on women. Freud actually believed women were biologically inferior. Adler said no way. He argued their struggles came from social inequality. Then there was human nature itself. Freud saw our instincts as these dangerous, dark forces that society had to crush. Adler was way more optimistic. He thought conflict came from things like poor education and people not learning how to cooperate. So after that big break, Adler was finally free to build his own thing from the ground up. He called it individual psychology, and it was a totally new, much more holistic way of looking at people. Now, that name, individual psychology, is super misleading. You hear individual and you think it's all about focusing on yourself in isolation. But that's the complete opposite of what he meant. The name comes from the Latin word individuum, which means indivisible. His whole point was that you can't break a person down into little pieces. You have to see them as a complete interconnected whole. And he put this stuff into practice in ways that were just light years ahead of his time. I mean, we're talking about concepts we totally take for granted today. Group therapy, family counseling, child guidance clinics, even marriage counseling. He was a huge believer in public education and self-help, arguing that psychology shouldn't be locked away for the elite, it should be for everyone. Which brings us to our final stop, Adler's legacy. Why are we still talking about these ideas a century later? Well, it's because they're arguably more relevant now than they've ever been. Adler's school of thought is absolutely alive and well. There are Adlerian training institutes and professional journals all over the world, and his core ideas are being woven into all kinds of modern, evidence-based therapies. His work didn't just disappear, it grew, it evolved.
In fact, just take a look at this modern wellness model. It talks about balancing our physical, psychological, and social health, all while finding a sense of purpose. This whole holistic picture, this is pure Adler. He was talking about the foundations of wellness long before it ever became a buzzword.
So let's wrap this all up. What are the big takeaways from Adler? First, that we are social creatures through and through. Second, that our own personal beliefs, our useful fictions, are incredibly powerful. Third, that good mental health is about balance, looking at the whole picture of our lives. And finally, that social equality isn't just a political ideal, it's absolutely essential for our mental health.
And that leaves us with one last question for you to think about. What's the useful fiction, that core belief, whether it's 100% true or not, that helps you get through the day and chase your goals? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.